think would be really interesting is just to know who here has been to one of these meetings before. Can we just have a show of hands if you've been to one of these meetings before? Just so that people can see, yeah. And then who is here for the first time? That's what I thought, yes. Which is wonderful because it means that a lot of what we need to do is to review what has happened to get us here and to also work forward from this place. The risk in the past has been every time we have new people, every time we start again. And that's a great way to create a very small circle. So what I think we need to do today is work forward quite quickly beyond the details of the schools, except perhaps the Vietnamese schools, because it would be really useful to understand, as we're in Vietnam, more of the Vietnamese system. And that we can then use the information that people have fed back to Joe Bowman about the basic schools, so that we can share that amongst people later in terms of enrollments and so on. But it's also, who sent that work back to Joe? Quite a few of you, I think, have sent the survey back. But if you haven't, perhaps we can also ask that people give that information either over these few days or in the next week, so that we've got as full a picture of the range of schools as we possibly could have. Would be really helpful. Can we just, it's just useful also to see, we have members, I believe, here from the other, from Hue or from Hanoi. But Hue or Hanoi here? Yeah. Tuan.
Lê Toàn,
Yeah. Perhaps it's possible just a small introduction of Hanoi. Yeah, yes, it would be very
Tôi xin được giới thiệu về học viện âm nhạc.
Just remind you.
Tôi xin giới thiệu về Học viện Âm nhạc Quốc gia Việt Nam. Chúng tôi là một cái nhà trường dạy âm nhạc chuyên nghiệp của Việt Nam, đã ra đời cách đây gần 60 năm.
Hanoi Conservatory of Music were established from 1965.
Yes. Học viện âm nhạc chúng tôi có hơn 20 khoa.
We have more than 20 departments.
Trong đó có những cái khoa chuyên sâu về âm nhạc châu Âu, cổ điển.
We have the department of the instrument performing in the Western classical music.
Các nhạc cụ giao hưởng, có thanh nhạc theo kỹ thuật opera.
Vocal department.
Có những cái khoa, một cái khoa nhạc cụ truyền thống Việt Nam, nhiều loại hình biểu diễn nghệ thuật âm nhạc Việt Nam.
The traditional performing is an instrument performing traditional music.
Chúng tôi có một viện nghiên cứu âm nhạc cũng ra đời cùng với học viện, nhưng mà hiện nay là sát nhập vào học viện.
We have the Institute Music, Vietnam Institute of Music.
Viện này có chức năng là sưu tầm, bảo tồn và phát huy những cái giá trị âm nhạc truyền thống Việt Nam.
This remain traditional music of Vietnam.
Cái đơn vị này đã cùng với cộng đồng các dân tộc Việt Nam, chúng tôi có 54 dân tộc, thì đã làm được một số cái di sản âm nhạc được UNESCO thế giới công nhận.
In Vietnam, we have the 54 minority. So we have some project, and we've successful for the UNESCO. This means the units from UNESCO.
Và trong cái lĩnh vực đào tạo thì chúng tôi có định hướng về công tác giáo dục đào tạo, biểu diễn và nghiên cứu khoa học.
And we have some solution to remain traditional music in Vietnam and also develop the Western music style.
Trong cái đào tạo của các tài năng trẻ thì chúng tôi có những cái trung tâm đào tạo âm nhạc thuộc về lĩnh vực xã hội hóa.
We have some music center to training for the people who want to study music.
Còn ở học viện thì có trung cấp, đại học và sau đại học.
We have four degree for the long-term training music, for the bachelor, for the master degree and for doctor degree.
Về đào tạo tiến sĩ âm nhạc thì hiện nay là Học viện Âm nhạc Quốc gia Việt Nam là một cái lò đào tạo đầu tiên tiến sĩ âm nhạc.
For the doctor degree, Hanoi Conservatory, the first institute to have the first permission to training this.
Và cái cấp tiến sĩ thì chúng tôi đã đào tạo được hơn 10 năm nay.
We already have a training for a doctor degree 10 years ago.
Ở học viện chúng tôi cũng đã có nhiều nghệ sĩ biểu diễn được danh hiệu của thế giới.
We get many prizes from the international competition.
Đặc biệt là có nghệ sĩ nhân dân Đặng Thái Sơn.
Especially Đặng Thái Sơn. She got the shopping prize in the Holland.
Cùng với Học viện Âm nhạc Quốc gia Việt Nam thì có Học nhạc viện Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, Học viện Âm nhạc Huế. Chúng tôi là ba cái nơi đào tạo của ba miền Bắc Trung Nam của Việt Nam được nhà nước rất quan tâm đầu tư và tạo điều kiện phát triển tài năng âm nhạc.
In Vietnam, we have the three conservatory, one in Chi Minh City, one in Hanoi, and in the center we have the Huế Conservatory Music, and three institutions. We get many things best from the government.
Rất cảm ơn quý vị và quý vị đại
Thank
biểu.
you.
Có dịp và xin mời quý vị đến
Welcome to Hanoi Conservatory.
Học viện Âm nhạc Quốc gia Việt Nam có cảm nhận âm nhạc.
Mời Việt Đức của bạn cái.
Học viện Âm nhạc Huế với thành lập được 5 năm trong quá trình thiết bị đào tạo nhạc chung.
The Huế Conservatory is 55 years old.
Mô hình đào tạo của Học viện Âm nhạc Huế là gần giống cái mô hình của Học viện Âm nhạc Quốc gia Việt Nam.
The system that they run is the same as the one in Hanoi in the Vietnam National Academy of Music.
Hiện nay chúng tôi chỉ có khác Học viện Âm nhạc Quốc gia Việt Nam cũng như là Nhạc viện Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, đó là có cái khoa đào tạo âm nhạc di sản.
Okay, and the difference between the Huế Conservatory and the conservatories in Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi is that they focus very much on traditional musical performance in Huế.
Và mục tiêu đào tạo của Học viện Âm nhạc Huế là chiến lược phát triển Học viện Âm nhạc Huế là đi lên bằng con đường âm nhạc dân tộc học.
And the objective of the Huế Conservatory is to promote Vietnamese traditional musical performance and to expand it.
Làm nhà trường, một học viện đóng trên cái thành phố cố đô của Việt Nam, thành phố di sản tưởng tượng của Việt Nam. Chúng tôi rất mong muốn được đón chào tất cả các bạn, các trường đào tạo cơ sở âm nhạc của khu vực ASEAN đến thăm thành phố festival của chúng tôi và thăm Học viện Âm nhạc của chúng tôi.
Okay, and Huế is in the traditional, the old ancient capital of Vietnam, so they feel very much responsible for promoting traditional Vietnam music to the rest of Vietnam and to the rest of the world.
Xin chào, cảm ơn.
Thank you very much. I have to apologize as well because what's actually happening here is Dr. Ha is an ethnomusicologist who graduated in Shanghai. He's translating it to Mandarin and I'm translating it to English, so if anything is lost in translation, please forgive us. Thank you very much.
So, what I'd like to do now is just update what's been happening with this group, why this group happens, and where we think we can take things over the coming few years, and why that we hope can be useful for the whole area. So just a bit of background. First of all, SEADOM, and I want to raise this right at the beginning so we don't get too caught up in the title of the group. We've spent previous meetings trying to find alternative titles for the group, but we haven't found one, so we're just going to stay with this one, even though it has limitations. When we say Southeast Asian Directors of Music, we don't mean just the leaders of the institutions. It's the people who are directing music in the region. So, in other words, everybody in the room today, whether the director or at a sort of senior administration level or faculty, we're classing as directors of music in the Southeast Asian region, just to clarify that. But we found that SEADOM actually is something we can say quite easily, whereas some of the other combinations we were trying ended up being very confusing, and there's enough challenges in language amongst the group without us having to have a title that is hard to pronounce. So basically, the first meetings actually took place back in 2008 in Macedon, and had a very simple idea, which was that really across Asia, no one knew much about what anyone else was doing, or indeed even who anyone else was. So the basic thing was there's a lot of activity going on which we don't know, and the general tradition had been you bring people in from outside of the region to act as the experts, but in many cases we thought there were opportunities for sharing within the region, both in terms of student opportunities, but also in terms of expertise. So the idea was to come gradually to know where the opportunities and the expertise was, so that we could draw on that in a more meaningful way. It was originally planned for all of Asia, but in the first meeting when Macedon sent out invitations, it really was only Southeast Asia that came along. And we felt actually that with over 600 million people in Southeast Asia, there was already enough of a project even within Southeast Asia to make that work. We also felt that politically it made sense to focus on a region that was itself trying to define itself and identify itself. So that's where it sort of came from. Originally, as I say, it was just meant to be an exchange of activities on an annual basis. In other words, we're doing a string event this year, we're doing a piano event this year, you could send some students and so on. But actually, when one gets into what needs to be done for music, as we all know, there's a lot more activity which we can benefit from having sort of these connections established. So subsequent meetings took place, as you can see up on the board, in a range of places, and it was very much trying to define how we can take this forward so that it has some political recognition and also some clearer sense of direction. And that has taken a while, because in the end, as we've heard already today, one of the great challenges anywhere in the world at present is funding. And how you get things to happen, well, they happen if there's there needs to be ideas, there needs to be vision, but there needs to be some way of supporting it to make it happen. So partly it's been about how to get that support. At first, in fact, a few institutions were actually finding the funding to allow everyone to do the projects. But it meant that then the events could only take place in one or two centers in Southeast Asia. And one of the things that was seen as important was that we need to move this so that it's, if possible, in a different country every year, so that that's one way we get to know programs, facilities, people, directions. And so it's been great actually now to come to Ho Chi Minh City and to know more about Vietnam. But so we've been to Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. So if you're not Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, beware. Because what we need to work forward to is where we might go for the next few events. But what we also want to do is move away just from an annual event to having more ongoing interaction. As you can see, in fact, although some meetings have been small and some have been larger, the representation across Southeast Asia has been quite inclusive. And one of the things that some of us have experienced is that many places in the world have national agendas, from education sector, from political sectors, and so on. If you're a small field like music, you are often dealing with, at the national level, with people who are not experts in your field and who really don't understand or want to believe what you say. I mean, for example, nobody really wants to fund one-to-one education because it's clearly very expensive. So unless you can advocate that it's also very necessary, it's very hard at a national level to have sufficient support for your case. And in some places in the world, because of this, international organizations have been formed to help give some sort of common voice across the region that acts as a support for the individual institution or the national discussion. And if, for example, in some contexts where perhaps in a moment in one country something becomes problematic, it's useful to have friends